Thank you very much for joining this session. Since we have only 45 minutes and we also want to leave about 15 minutes for audience questions, I'm going to quickly introduce the panel, thank the organizers, give some sort of a background context, and dive into the questions, which is why we are all here. So starting with the introductions, I'm delighted to introduce a pertinent panel for the topic. Chitra Ravi, who's the founder of Chrysalis, an education solutions provider. Dr. Parth Shah, President, Center of Civil Society, a policy advocate. Varun Kumar, co-founder IMAX, an education solutions provider. Ramki, CEO, Shiksha Finance, a school finance company. And myself, Vikram Jain, Director, FSG. I lead a program to improve quality of budget private schools. On behalf of my panelists and myself, I thank Nudge Foundation, Central Square Foundation, and Susan Dell Foundation for offering us this opportunity to share ideas. So let's get into the session. Just to set the context, our discussion today is about budget private schools. For this session, I'm defining them as schools that charge about 21,000 rupees per child per annum as all-inclusive fees. Our estimate is that there are about 300,000 budget private schools in India, and approximately 50% of children go to budget private schools. Of course, the percentage is much higher in urban India, where about 80% of low-income families go to budget private schools. All of us on the panel want to provide high quality and improve the quality of being offered in these budget private schools to children. So my first question to Parth and Ramki is, in the recent years, there has, before the current situation, there was a shift, there was a gradual shift from government schools to budget private schools. Do you see this reversing? Do you see the trend will continue? What are your short-term and long-term views? Maybe we can start with Parth.
Thank you, Vikram, and thank you all for giving this opportunity to join the panel. Actually, the shift in the past 10 to 15 years has been quite dramatic, not gradual. If you look at the numbers of students who have migrated from government schools to private schools are in terms of millions, right? So that has been the history. Now, I think what would happen because of the impact of COVID, right, would largely depend on what policies we put in place in response to this and what kind of support systems we generate, right, to help not just government schools, but also private schools. Right? So I think largely the trend in the future is in our control, in the sense that it will depend on what we do in response to the current crisis. So for example, if you are going to put a lot of extra burdens on private schools, which is currently happening in terms of fee controls, not asking parents to pay fees to schools for 3 or 4 months of the lockdown period. Right? If those are the ways we are going to deal with the crisis, then obviously private school would not be able to survive for that longer period of time without having any revenues. Right? Secondly, obviously, we also know the impact, the economic impact of the lockdown, which is on the livelihoods of people. As we know, vast majority of people who send the kids to budget private schools are in the low income, right? And many of them are daily wage earners, right? And their whole livelihoods are now threatened. So if that is not being addressed, which is not purely an education problem, but of an economic problem, but if that is not addressed, then obviously it would have a huge impact on the education system itself. Right? So my sense is that the impact would depend on how we react and respond to the crisis. And I think that is an important thing for us to think about, that what kind of system do we want to see at the end of the crisis and moving into the future? And then what do we need to do now so that we are able to support the emergence of that system.
Sure. Ramki, your views? Ramki, you're on mute.
Thanks, Vikram, for introducing, and thanks to all of you for giving me this opportunity. We have thus far funded close to about 3,000 odd predominantly affordable private schools in the last 4 years. And we are in active touch with our customers. And I tend to agree with Dr. Parth. The school entrepreneurs, in fact, I spoke to about a dozen of them in the last couple of days. There are a couple of things that's happening in respective state governments. Take, for example, Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu government has clearly indicated to school entrepreneurs, the private school entrepreneurs, not to increase the fees. So that's for surely, I don't think there's going to be any increase in fees. The second condition, though though it's not still confirmed, is that they are also not allowed the private school entrepreneurs to admit intake of students. So you're not going to have any incremental fee income, nor is there going to be any volume growth. Okay. Having said that, Vikram, permit me to say that we serve the bottom of the pyramid population, and the schools that these students go, the parents are generally, daily wage earners and economically challenged profiles. We also fund students, and we have thus far funded close to about 65,000 school-going students education loan. We spoke to parents, and I would like to give this perspective, which is extremely relevant in the sense that as we are battling this pandemic, none of us know how long this is going to last and the deep impact that it's going to create in the future earnings of these people. So many parents have told us that they would not continue in the private school and they would like to shift to government school because that is where you get free meals. And that's most important for these people because otherwise, their situation is going to become from bad to worse. So I tend to agree with Dr. Path. We are in a situation where the migration is going to be more pronounced. That's our view.
Great. I want to ask Dr. Path and Ramki just a single point question, which is what percentage of these budget private schools, in your view, today are operating virtual classes? Just give the number, your best estimate.
I think it would depend on what you mean by virtual classes. So if you, for example, referring to what we are doing now, a Zoom class of this kind, then I think there are very, very few schools which are able to do that, right? One, of course, they don't have resources within the school. And I think more importantly, the teachers who are at home do not have those resources to be able to run high bandwidth network and connectivity they need to run this kind of classes, right? So what is happening across, I think, low-fee private school segment, and I think also true in many other contexts, is use of WhatsApp. Right? So WhatsApp messages are going out, the lesson plans are sent out on a WhatsApp message in the morning, right? And the teacher is available for a few hours during the day to address questions that come up from the students, right? So I think WhatsApp has become the key medium in terms of technological platform to engage with the parents and students for these budget private schools and the teachers, right? How effective that is, I think that's anyone's guess as of now, right? But it does, I think, fulfill some need, right, that there is, right? My sense is that one big learning that will come out from this experience is the understanding that learning does not happen only within the boundaries of the school. Right? I think one big thing that would happen is that we all recognize the learning can happen anywhere, anytime. Right? It was initially academic understanding. We all understood that academically, yes, that's true. But now I think all stakeholders in the system understand that. Parents understand that, students understand that, and obviously regulators understand that. Right? So my hope is also that this understanding of the fact that learning has escaped school boundaries, right, has important role to play in how we think about the future of education.
Sure. I'll direct my next question for Chitra and Varun, both of whom lead education solution companies. So given the current situation, the current lockdown situation that we are in right now, and at least our understanding is that about, given the segment that we are working with, only about 50% of the families have a smartphone. How are budget private schools responding to parents' needs for education in this current short time? Maybe we start with Chitra.
Yeah, thanks, Vikram. So in the month of April, and I'm going to draw from our own experience, the experience of Chrysalis, we work with around 300 odd budget private schools currently. And we launched a home learning plan. And I agree with Dr. Parth, in this segment or even in large base of mid-market schools that we work with, virtual classroom is not a reality. You know, we are talking about remote learning. How can we ensure a continuity in learning in the students? That's how it is. So we launched some home learning plan, and I also want to bring a difference here. There is this confusion in the minds of all stakeholders. If is it homeschooling or home learning, right? And we have to be very clear that this is not about homeschooling. If you're looking at homeschooling, I don't think this segment is it suits the segment at all, because most of them are first generation learners, and there's not going to be somebody who can school. And with the elite, it will be other kind of problems. I'm not getting into that. So if it's about home learning, we have tried to bring in, like Dr. Path said, some WhatsApp small videos, assignments to students, and we deal with the very kindergarten to grade 5. So you can also see in this early education, it's even more difficult to bring in. I would think that about 17% or 18% of our schools actually proactively sought this in the APS segment. And they have also gotten back saying their parents are happy about it. We are right now trying to see what it means, how has this been used, and what lessons can we learn from this. But I would think it's a very small population. But we have to really wait it out and see, because it is too early to say. As solution providers, we are also exploring various tools to see how we can ensure continuity in learning. And then comes, I think, the larger question of quality and outcome-based, education. So the first thing would be, how do we continue learning? How do we ensure that children are engaged and do not lose that habit of, of educating? The families do not lose that habit. But I think over a period of time, this should also move to not losing what all of us, I think, in this panel have been speaking about in terms of achieving impact and achieving solid outcomes. So I would think right now it's a very, very small population that is exploring or trying to commit to something like remote learning.
Sure. Varun, your views?
Hi, this is Varun, and thanks everyone for joining this session. I agree with whatever is being said, and as Chitra said, when we were started, the first demand was, can you just give something? Can you give me some worksheet? And that adoption was very, very high. We saw a spike in parent apps download, learning app download. So those were like immediate response to the situation. But the nuance I want to add is this time is very specific. So the April was the exam month, and May and say part of June is typically the summer break. So in some ways, schools are also in a little bit of wait and watch mode in terms of how the situation will unfold. So basically April, the mindset was, so only the CBSE schools, which don't come under the budget private schools, are the one who are worried about, can we start virtual classrooms? Those are the one who are basically trying to figure out some hacky solution with Zoom. But basically, if you look at the budget private school, typically April is the exam month, right? And the government said the exams are cancelled. So typically the schools finish the portion by February. So basically, as of now, schools are not feeling the brunt. So the way we see it, like the way situation unfolds, then basically July is when the pressure for like live classrooms start picking up. And we have launched a solution. About 100 schools have signed up. They're tinkering with it. But right now, nobody seems serious because until they hit July, and basically then they'll have to justify how do we collect fees, right? And when that pressure starts, right? And then how do we, when the parents start going to job and it's expected the schools will open a little later and like after the economy opens, right? So that period is where basically the behavior will suddenly change again. So one shift is now where it is, let's give some worksheet. There's not as much pressure. It's anyway supposed to be summer holiday. Last year portion was done. And you see that again behavior, one more shift we are predicting will happen in July, where there'll be sudden increase. Okay, like unless we deliver and engage the student while parents are out, we won't be able to justify school fee collection. So I anticipate some behavior change again June and July first week.
Sure. Both Chitra and Varun, let's switch the lens a little bit to the long term. This is we are talking about bottom of the pyramid. This is the largest segment in India. 5 years from now, how will the budget school experience change for the child? Maybe start with Chitra.
Yeah, I think all that we are speaking currently is in a very short-term view, and if you look at it in the long term, one thing is very clear: more and more reliance on technology. I'm not saying 100% reliance on technology, but like Dr. Path said, even the myth that everything has to happen in the school might be busted. And but I still think any parent would want a guardian and a custodian of their child's learning. Today, the custodian is a school. In my mind, 5 years down the line, the custodian will be this institution called school. So I don't see a threat to the school ecosystem. I've been a parent and I am a parent, and I really think that even in the lower end of the spectrum, we have seen why does this drift from government to budget private schools happen? There is some quality perception. I mean, we can all say from a very high level standpoint that the parents are not discerning, they don't know outcomes, etc. But they have chosen schools, private schools, for certain reasons. It could be that, and foregoing the meal, right? We were talking about, right? They've foregone the meal and said, I'm going to work extra hard to put them in a private school. So there is a quality perception. How solid it is, how authentic is it, is what we are all trying to shift all stakeholders to. And so I think that 5 years down the line, schools are going to become more solid. They will be the custodians, and I'm sure the short-term drift and shift, even if it happens as migration to government schools like Ramki was saying, I think it will be a very short-term reaction, and it's going to come back to private schools, to quality private schools. I think one good thing will also be the survivors, be it solution providers like us or schools, only the quality will survive. And I'm very clear on that. I also think that technology will come in the entire spectrum. How much, to what dosage, will all depend on the policymakers and the access to technology that we bring in. But I think today's children are digital learners, and they will be easily adapting to that. So I think I feel very, very responsible now as a CEO of a solution providing company, that we use this opportunity to not move in a manner in which we impart meaningless education through screens, but how do we tap and leverage on this and bring in a beautiful blend. That is the thought process that is happening in our team's mind. And I think I'm very positive that this temporary thing, even after 18 months, is going to go back. We'll have more quality private schools coming. And I think time now for all APS schools to go back to their, framework and see how do we partner with the right people and bring in meaningful learning, so that it is not just a meal that pulls you to a school, and it's high quality education.
Sure. No, I absolutely agree. I mean, parents are choosing to pay. I think that's the important point here. Varun, over to you. What are your views about how the experience will change in 5 years?
Yes, as Chitra has covered on more on what, so let me speak. While I agree with her, maybe I can spend a little bit more on how part. So the way we see it, basically, for any low cost, affordable service to basically scale at quality, usually you look at systems and accountability. And I think technology plays a huge role in that. And while students' propensity to adopt to technology is usually very high, as Chitra was saying, they will anyway pick up learning apps, they'll pick up at-home solution as Parth was mentioning, and the learning will break the bounds of school. But at the same time, for a quality service, basically, the whole focus on system and accountability. And for that, the technology part, this exposure of technology to school teachers and school owners, right? Like them using it, so then your ability to track assessment, your ability to track syllabus completion, ability to track learning levels, as those workflows will start getting automated, the overall quality will go up. So I see that technology will become more like an inverter. So like think of live classrooms and virtual classrooms. If you have intermittent lockdowns in future, so like things are opening, shutting, government is saying do 30% and do 50%. So the schools will adopt to technology as and when needed. Quality will remain paramount, but the behaviorally long term, what will change is the technology adoption will drive system adoption and higher accountability, which I believe is really tremendous opportunity.
Varun, your voice is cracking. I would
Hello, is it better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, just to summarize, the impact technology will have is automating the workflows and accountability, and that is really exciting as an entrepreneur. That what can be done to drive the quality up, and that's the way for affordable quality service to scale. That's the role technology plays, and that's what we are excited about.
Sure.
If I can jump in a little bit, if you would mind.
Sure.
Okay. So I think there are three very positive changes that are happening. And my sense is that BPS would have to think seriously about how to reinforce them, how to sustain those changes moving forward. So one, I talked about how the learning has escaped the walls of the school. Right? The perception has now changed across the system. Right? Second, I think the biggest thing that has happened is the family engagement, the learning of the child. Right? The parents who, for various reasons, right, for the economic necessity, a lack of their own education, who were quite detached from what was happening in the child's life in terms of education, are now far more engaged just by default of being together in the same room, right, or in the same house, right? So family engagement, and I think at Rukmani Banerjee was pointing out this morning, the Pratham experience, it's not just mothers who we always sort of look up to in a sense and not try to bring them in through the various means of PTA committees and other routes. But even fathers are far more engaged. So she was saying this morning, the father responses to questions which are being asked are far more numerous than mother's responses. Right? So I think it's an interesting shift happening within the family structure in the engagement that is happening with the child. It's not just the mother, it's also father. So the third thing I see is learning by doing. So again, the examples you hear about, right? So many of the low-fee private schools are not able to run high-class lesson plans through WhatsApp, right? They're able to give very small projects to do, right? So tell me about what happened in your house today in this area, right? How did you decide about how much water? Can you tell me about how much water was used in your house today? Measure in terms of buckets or tumblers or whichever way they can measure it, right? So things of those kind. So learning by doing, which I frankly had sort of thought would never happen because we have become just so focused on textbooks and now on devices. The learning by doing would never be a sort of possibility, the old Gandhian idea of Nai Talim in a sense, right? So somehow it's coming back in the system, right? And I think it's interesting to see, like you, my own child, I have 8-year-old, and he has learned how to cut watermelon. No, it's a very simple thing. When you think about it for an 8-year-old, such a hard thing that watermelon is, using a big knife to cut and make something that he can eat from, is a huge learning and a huge self-control that he has acquired just in the last 40 days, right? He's my barista. He makes my coffee. not just instant coffee. He's able to use my AeroPress machine to make coffee, right? Which frankly, I would have thought he would learn only when he goes to college and lives in a hostel, right? At home, he would never learn these things because they don't have to do these things in ordinary times, right? But I think learning by doing such a big thing, and I hope that we keep building on it as we move forward.
Yeah, but thank
Vikram,
you. I mean,
add a point here. I just wanted to add, like, since Dr. Path was talking so much about, I think there will also be a very clear branching of, like, for example, if you're talking about skills like reading and writing and aspects like problem solving, critical thinking, they are all different branches, right? And for now, we were actually compromising on many of these. I think the time will come to then differentiate where what kind of learning will come and what kind of pedagogy will work as well. I think that thought process will also start happening. And, globally now they're saying the pre-primary kids should be coming back to school sooner than even the middle and high school. And the reason being that time of children to pick up literacy, numeracy cannot be outsourced to informal setting, right? So there are many, many perspectives and points of view coming, which is very good for the ecosystem if you were to look at the roses among the thorns.
Sure. No, so thank you for pointing out learning by doing. I mean, most of my work is trying to promote that. So good. Ramki, I wanted to understand from you, one, what do you think is the impact going to be on fees? Now, obviously, some of the government regulation is going to, cap fees, or some states might do it, some might not do it. But there's also the economic side of the parents' livelihood. And since you have probably, got the best financial pulse of the schools, could you share some light? What do you see in terms of the fees, just whether going up or down over the coming years?
Permit me to say this, Vikram, in the sense that while you're talking about the fee structure for the ensuing academic year, even the affordable private schools that we have funded, the indication is that 15 to 25% of the current academic year fees itself is pending. So that backlog will have to be collected, that's given. In that context, generally the affordable private schools square up the collection by March, April. But this year it's not going to be so. We don't know when these schools are going to restart. So there's a backlog there. And my sense is that even assuming the government directive is relaxed, I don't think this year, one is increasing the fee. Okay, generally about 10% increase happens, but whether the parents, can they afford to pay that? Because they are all distorted, there's loss of livelihood. And even in a city like Chennai where we operate, we see it in a very pronounced manner. So my hunch is that it will be status quo, and collecting the backlog itself is going to be a challenge, which means it's going to put tremendous financial stress on the private schools.
Understood. Thanks for that perspective. I'm going to ask this question, the last question, and I request my panelists to say just in a sentence. So what are your two wishes or ideas to improve the quality of the budget private schools? So if everybody can it could be one, but can you just say that in a sentence, and then we'll move to some of the audience questions.
Vikram, can you repeat that? I didn't understand. What are your
top two ideas or wishes to improve the quality of budget private schools?
Can I take it first, Vikram?
Sure.
My wish would be there should be an institutionalized approach to upgrade the qualities, abilities of the teaching staff, because that's a major problem in most of the schools that we find. Because if there is no qualitative teachers, learning outcomes are distorted. Second thing is to invest in better infrastructure facilities in schools.
Okay, thank you.
I would think it is all about a community, a strong community of all the stakeholders that will make this happen, Vikram. I personally think across the schools that we work with, there is a lot of trust issues, and there is not consistent, continuous communication. It is, I think, the way to improve quality, and I'm talking about even budget private schools where we may not see that parents were highly educated. That doesn't mean that, I mean, they may not be qualified, but I'm sure they have a lot of common sense. Bring them together, make them understand the quality parameters and clarity on what each one should be contributing to make this happen to the child. If that doesn't happen, and if the stakeholders' vision and mission is misaligned, which is what happens right now, more transparency coming in, I think that will really pave way for a strong, quality factor coming into the school. I think I took more than a sentence, but I used conjunctions.
Okay.
I think, of course, I would agree, but would like to add that I think it's an opportunity to relook at the whole learning outcome reporting and benchmark and assessment. And I think previously all the efforts struggled because the amount of effort it will take, subjectivity it had, and technology can really aid to that. And I think, I mean, more commonsensical, I'm not saying it should involve things like learning by doing, problem solving, creative thinking, more comprehensive like look at the benchmark. But I think it's a good time to relook at benchmark and how we can basically drive the quality. And technology can play a big role. And second, if possible, something on English, and going back to Chitra's point on reading and writing, the basic, because English is the medium of these affordable private schools. And if the students struggle with the language of instruction, that creates a huge debt in the upcoming year. Those are my 2 points.
I spoke a little longer last time, so I thought I'll go last. I don't have two sort of concrete ideas, but I think I can talk about 2 enabling conditions that could be created to then move towards higher quality education across the board, particularly for BPS, which is our focus. Right? And I think first, we know quality costs money. Right? It can't be done on cheap, right? If you look at government investments in government schools, just in Delhi, for example, increased from 22,000 per student per year to about more than 55,000 today, right? In the just last 6 years, right? So that's the kind of investment governments are making per student, right? And even then they have challenges of meeting those quality standards that we have, right? So it's not going to happen with 21,000 rupees a year fee, right? So I think we need to understand that that is a key constraint. And that's where I think policy comes in the picture. So making sure that the RT 25% seat payments are made on time, right? Made transparently, right? So those are basic things government should be able to do to enable the finances to flow, which are not anything extra, which is due to them as it is by law, right? Secondly, I think we are doing a lot of exemptions for MSMEs. Why not treat small private schools also as part of MSME, right? And give them the same benefits we are giving in terms of loan repayment being delayed, all of the things which are being done for MSMEs can easily be done for private schools, some exemption for taxes that they have to pay, property tax, or all other taxes. So I think there are ways in which we can help private schools financially to be able to invest more and spend time in building quality. And second, I think I agree that secondly, it's also regulation, right? The requirements we have put, and as you know, we have talked about this all the time, our RT infrastructure and input focus, right? Can we now focus more on learning outcomes? This learning can happen anywhere, right? Less than design our parameters of regulation, focus on learning outcomes, and then free the schools to do whatever they need to do, online, blended, in class, right? Methods they are best suited for their own students, given the socioeconomic background students come from. Right? I think that's a really good way of thinking about what can improve the quality in the sector.
Sure. I'm now looking at some of the questions that have been posed. One of the questions was about what policy interventions, and I'll just just respond with what Dr. Path said, that RTE fees could be paid on time, treat private schools as MSME, shift the focus from where the education is happening to the learning outcomes, and probably direct money also accordingly. So that hopefully question. There was some question about do you see consolidation private schools, and what would help it, or is it even helpful? So I'll repeat my question. Do you see consolidation in budget private schools happening, and is that even desirable?
My sense is it would happen to some extent. I think this is a time of disruption, right? And the disruptions always create sort of new models. Fact that people are getting used to online learning, which we all thought was a huge challenge just a few months ago, right? Just like for us working from home, nobody thought a whole office can work from home earlier, right? So I think that learning has now ingrained in our psyche that we can do this. And I think that will create very different models of education delivery. And particularly in the BPS segment where there's always this constraints of resources, right? Now that could mean that people will just rethink how we deliver education, why we do what we do, when we do it, who does it, right? So all of those questions can be taken up again, and that could create a different model of education delivery, and that could mean consolidation also in the sector.
Do you see, Dr. Path, again, there was a question for you. Do you see a lot of, firstly, are there a lot of unrecognized schools, and do you see this might consolidate them?
Actually, my sense is that we are going to move more and more towards unrecognized schools because the cost of recognition is so high, frankly, and doesn't really deliver much value anymore. So it used to be the case the government thappa was necessary, right? Now I think parents across the board, and not just education, but also in other areas, right, become savvy enough to be able to judge quality, right, if they spend some time thinking about it, right? And my sense is that we would see more schools which are small schools, right, catering to very specific needs of specific communities, right? And that would mean that it could mean that many more unrecognized schools in the future than what we have today.
Sure. This is a question for anybody on the panel. Do you think making budget private schools like a private enterprise, because a lot of them are run as trusts or non-profits, do you think that sort of a policy shift would help?
Vikram, I would like to go first on this. As lenders, we'll be very happy if such a thing happens. Because once when you're a legal entity, because once when you become a private limited company, you're duty bound by the register of companies to file returns, and most of the data would be available for us at the click of a button. There is a feeling, a tinge of opaqueness in the way in which schools are run, because most of them are trust, and we all know what happens generally, in such structures. So for us as lenders, it will be great, because that's a question that we have to keep answering to our lenders as well as to our investors as to how we assess incomes in schools, the expenditure, because most of them are, not properly maintained. So yes, we would be the first one to welcome this.
Other thoughts?
I also agree that that's one of the biggest change that could happen is to free the schools from this legal boundaries which are created, right? So I think schools can be registered as companies under Companies Act. And on the top of that, I think what is the most important and very helpful to the business that Ramki talked about is also transparency requirements. Companies today have to file many more documents than trusts and societies do, right? And therefore, I think transparency would increase in the sector, which is good for good schools. They are all labeled together along with other schools which are not so transparent and not so well sort of behaved, right? So I think transparency is a good way to separate bad wheat from chaff, as they say, right? Also a great way to bring talent and capital into the sector, because there'll be much more courage to invest in the sector than what currently is available. Right? So I agree that allowing schools to become registered as companies, opening that option at least, would be a good thing.
With a double bottom line, perhaps, Vikram, that the impact and outcomes are not compromised for return on capital and investment. But that, of course, is just an aside in terms of having the vision and the checks and balances. Because unlike maybe food or whatever, education impact and benchmarks are a little more subtle and needs more discernment. So that should not be compromised.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, totally echo the thought of panel. And as I said, if you have sensible benchmarking along with unaided private schools becoming private entities, will, I think, overall lead to much better and more dynamic ecosystem.
Great. We're almost time up. I was told I should try and end a couple of minutes early. So I think I managed to do that. And thanks to the panel for keeping the answers short, succinct. Any final thoughts anybody has? We have a minute, but that's it otherwise from me.
Thank you.
I think one just thought which was not discussed, which I had in my mind, that the shift of the tier 1, 2 cities versus 3, 4, we should not look at it as an overall thing. The migration will be much harder. And basically, there was a point which was running in my head, wanted to share that. But I think overall, you can see there's a lot of alignment in the thoughts and ideas. And I think we as a sector are a little bit lag, right? We'll open later. The policies will affect us later. So we'll have more time to probably prepare, which will mean we'll have to take the hit a little bit longer. I'm sure Ramki and Chitra and I are not happy about the longer hit, but it probably gives us more time to prepare as well. So while it's a bad time, but I think there is a big opportunity as well.
Great. So just, I'm just saying some of the points that I heard, and then I'll stop the session, which is, tech is acting as a complement going forward. That's one of the themes we heard. Investing in teachers, parents trying to understand quality, relook at benchmarking or evaluation approaches. I think there was also a couple of points about, quality does cost money. So, recognizing that. Of course, there was a lot of emphasis, I think, unison across the group about seeing if these schools could be registered as private companies would definitely help them improve transparency, etc. And then some suggestions for government like RT fees being paid on time, focusing more on learning outcomes rather than the place. And of course, learning by doing was one of the other themes. So with that, I'll pause. I thank the organizers again. And
thank you,
Tanvi.
Thanks, Vikram. Thanks, all of you.